So hi everyone and welcome back to the Pete Talk Garage channel. In this video we're going to look at a little Greystoke stages rally report. It's not going to be too long on that because we only finished 2 stages and we broke down and had a massive failure in halfway through the 3rd stage. The conditions were very poor on that rally, but I'm not blaming the rally or the surface. We'll talk a bit more about grading in the loosest sense of the word, more of a strategic dumping of gravel. But we'll spend a little bit of time looking at the Mini, the Gen 1 Mini suspension architecture, and why I believe this is the weakest point of the car in terms of race, track day cars or a rally car. Obviously, it was never designed to be a rally car. It was designed to go to Tesco's and pull down the motorway, but I think we found the weakest link of the car. Because in general, the car's pretty hardy. So we'll spend a bit of time looking at the suspension layout or how we can mitigate further failures going forward, because it's something I'm really quite concerned about, just because I don't want to spend money on dampers every time this bolt snaps. And yeah, it's a bit of a shocker, if excuse the pun. Anyway, moving back to the rally, I'm just going to read you a very quick rally report, just to get out of the way. There's only 2 stages, like I said. So after podiums in class at Anglesey, the tarmac rally, and my first gravel rally, which was plains, I was very much looking forward to another podium, maybe better, and I've reunited with my original co-driver Alan from Anglesey. And at last it was a rally a bit closer to home. So I actually drove the car to scrutineering on Saturday without faffing around with the trailer. Just drove up there, up the M6 on tarmac tyres, and it was very easy. Managed to stay at home Saturday night. So really comfortable rallying for me because it's so close to where I live. Prep, the car was basically unchanged from plains. I lifted the ride height a little bit because I heard from locals up there during the kind of weeks preceding the rally that the conditions were poor. The road state was poor. I think M Sport, you know, the motorsport factory arm of Ford, they've been testing the kind of Ford Raptor Dakar car up there. It's obviously created a lot of havoc on the road, and don't worry, they regraded it. Well, they hadn't. They just dumped a load of gravel down. Regrading involves tearing up the surface, mixing, basically ripping off the top surface, mixing it, rolling it, and bedding it in with more fine aggregate, maybe. That just wasn't the case. They just basically filled in washboard and potholes with just loose stone. It never really was going to work. So we lifted the ride height as much as possible. I've ridden up there on my bike years and years ago, many times, just on my gravel bike and mountain bike around the forest up there. And it's never been this bad. It's never been like this. It's normally quite a safe gravel rally. I knew it was going to be bumpy. Extra zip ties were put in it, tape round relays and stuff, just holding everything down in the engine bay. Anyway, stage 1, steady away, but we were very comfortable in the quickly forming ruts. And we're running at the back now, not at the front like we were on plains. So we are starting to get ruts very early on from the Rally 2 cars and the powerful cars. It was a fairly long stage as well, much longer than anything we'd experienced at plains. It was about 10 minutes long, and it gave us time to really settle in and get into a rhythm before even the finish of the stage. We caught the car ahead. A little Nova. As you know, Novas on rallies can be very quick, but I was quite chuffed to catch one. Unfortunately, didn't manage to pass it before the flying finish. We lost a little bit of time. Now, the number of stricken cars already on the road on stage 1 was quite alarming, and that was a theme of the day going on. Stage 2, more stricken cars, basically. The ruts were deepening, but we pushed harder on the smoother, straight sections, and it was really fun to let the car slither about on the mud. We caught the car ahead again much earlier this time, and we were driving blind in the mud coming off the back of that car for a good half a minute, and I basically ran out of washer fluid just because I was constantly on the washer fluid jets. And I think at one point I was constantly on the horn, and kudos to car 46. Like, the fact that they saw us or even heard us with so much going on, so much gravel noise, and the mud on their windscreen at the back, like, I don't know how they saw us, but they let us through, and so I think we only lost about 15 to 20 seconds, and we got a really good time on that stage. We actually went a lot faster than stage 1, which is obviously it was a rerun of stage 1, and I think we were lying 3rd after that, so it was pretty cool. But now here's a crazy stat for you. After stage 2, it seemed like 1 in 3 cars of the rally would retired or were looking to retire, walking around the paddock service area. We had a bit of time. I did some sort of like quick mental maths. We're a third away through the rally and a third of the cars are out. So at this rate, at the end of the rally, if everyone's driving like this, no one's going to finish. So we approached stage 3 with a completely different mindset. We agreed, Alan and I, just to drive around. I was like, I said to him, I almost don't need pace notes. I'm just going to drive around. I'm not even going to risk anything, because at this rate, with the failures that are happening. I mean, after stage 2, I had one guy to the left of me that had ripped the exhaust manifold off, and other guys in the paddock, some dampers already exploding, and engine mounts and gearbox mounts breaking. I just said to him, I was like, at this point, we just need to drive around. So that's what we did, and the onboards could attest to that. And the start of stage 3, sometimes the quickest and safest way through a corner with deep ruts is to basically just take it, get in the rut, and use it as like a slot car and just take the corner through the ruts and just go on the sump. That was getting okay to an extent where the ruts were getting so deep, we basically didn't have any wheel droop left to hit the bottom of the rut with any steering. So I didn't have any steering on some of these corners because the ruts were so deep. So I felt like to drive next to the ruts, which is okay if you're going slow enough, but it's so loose there's no traction if you really go too far. So I was just pootling around, not going in the ruts, and we were doing fine. And then on one exit of the corner, slow right-hander came out. There was a lot of washboard from cars, you know, tramping and putting down the power. Now, I don't know if that was from the rally or that's from the Dakar testing. We'd excavated all that gravel. Now we're getting down onto like sort of the pothole underneath. I didn't really hit anything per se, and suddenly the rear damper just let go. Massive bang. I could hear it scraping on the floor. At first I thought it was the exhaust on the floor.
Jump out and have a look. Oh, bloody hell.
He's fucking rough, innit?
Fuck.
Yeah. We're tracking undercarriage.
We quickly pulled over at the marshal point. I jumped out and just saw the rear suspension collapse. The marshals came over, were great help. They really helped us even get back to service. Unfortunately, we had to wait another stage because it wasn't safe to leave the stage. At the end of stage 4, we drove back to surface, basically with a bit of silver birch in place of the coilover holding the car up. Surprisingly, that stayed in for about a mile before it popped out, and then we're on the floor again. So credit to the marshals, they really looked after us and sort of lifted our spirits a bit with bacon butty as well. So that was at least something we got out of the day. Now, we didn't finish the rally, obviously, and a lot of people didn't finish the rally. I think in total that's stat, but I think overall it ended up about a third of the cars didn't finish the rally. The carnage from the conditions was bad. However, I'm not blaming fully on the conditions. Now, I genuinely think the Minis, and it's been well documented, and there are kind of mods within the Mini community to get around this, but we kind of realized one of the weak points of the Mini suspension architecture. I don't think this happened because of the conditions at Greystoke. Nothing ever happens unless it's like an ultimate tensile failure. It's been an accumulation of fatigue and bending on this area of the rear suspension. Now, the way this works, and I've got some CAD and some exploded diagrams to kind of illustrate how this works. And I think this is the only car that has this suspension architecture, and it's crazy that I'm saying that. It's normally cars kind of follow a similar rear suspension layout, whether it's torsion beam or independent rear suspension, and particularly most shopping cars, you know, cars that go to Tesco and back, they don't have anything like this. So this is kind of an independent rear suspension. It's not a torsion beam, but the whole coilover, and this car comes with a coilover from stock, so it's not a separate damper and spring, it's a coilover, even the stock one. It bolts into the trailing arm, essentially the swing arm, with a single bolt. Now, it's a big chunky bolt. It's an M14 by 1.5 pitch, and it's about 85 or 90 mil long, so it's pretty chunky. But that bolt and the friction interface it creates between the bottom of the damper and the trailing arm, or the swing arm, is taking all the suspension loads. So I don't think this was damaged or bent at Greystoke. And you see the car, like this is a picture of my car at angle, so you go over jumps. This is when the damage occurs. And if that friction interface between the bottom of the damper and the upright or the trailing arm slips, that bolt is then going into bending. And it's a single cantilevered load, and the bolt's just fatigued and snapped. And like, last time I serviced the dampers and took them off the car, I felt that bolt was slightly bent as it wound itself out of the thread. And there's a captured nut on the other side of the trailing arm, which is welded on. And it's very, very tight. As soon as the bolts gets bent, it's hard to get them out of that. And I should have replaced the bolts because it was obviously just fatigued. That bolt snapped, the dampers hit the floor, and that's our rally over. Now, these cars weren't exactly designed in the first place to go rallying, were they? They were designed to go to Tesco, pick up Granny, and pull down the motorway. Now, the Gen 1 Mini, I still think it's one of the best modern cars of the last 20 years. Well, 2020, was it come out in 2002, I think? Yeah, so about 25 years now. And it followed the original ethos of the original Morris or Austin Mini, which was maximum interior space for minimum exterior space, or minimum exterior size. and the packaging of it is paramount. And this kind of suspension layout gives you good packaging, so it keeps the stack height of the subframe on the back quite low because the shock is pushed outboard. You get quite good ride dynamics because there's no like harsh leverage ratio. So on a lot of cars where they push the spring inboard on its own cup, it's a lot stronger, but the string is a lot shorter and it has to be stiffer because it's got the wheel has a mechanical advantage because of the lever arm where that cup is situated. If you've got a coilover mounted right next to the wheel, you've basically got a lever ratio of 1, and the spring rate can be quite low, and the damper can be really, really supple, and you can get fine adjustment on the damper like that. So it's kind of good in that respect, and it's good for packaging. So you keep the rear bench low. It doesn't encroach into the wheel arches too much, so it's good for packaging. Obviously, they didn't really think about making it like an Impreza when they were designing the Gen 1 Mini. It's like this, and it's not criminal. It's just obviously it's designed to be a shopping car, not a rally car, but it is really the weak link. And some of the motorsport guys who prep these cars, they do have fixes for this. For instance, one of them is like basically taking a bit of steel pipe, cutting it down the middle and creating a cup, so the bottom of the damper sits in the cup, and that bolt gets more of a kind of fork support. So there's not so much cantilever bending on that. Now, I say the problem with that is you lower the ground clearance a little bit because that cup gets closer to the ground, so it's more likely to hit stuff. But I think the bigger issue for me, or my welding skills or fabrication skills, would be getting that cup tight enough on the bushing. So when you put the bolt through the bushing, that cup is clamping on the bushing. Because if that bushing or that bottom of the shock is loose in that cup, it's going to fatigue the bolt anyway. It's going to be rattling around. It's going to fatigue the inside of the bush. So unless that part is made very, very accurately, really tight on the bushing, so when you put the damper in, it's a really nice, tight, snug fit, so when you do the bolt up, it clamps the damper, I don't think it's the nicest. And looking deeper into the R56, which is this Gen 2 Mini, they obviously, BMW knew this was a problem, even on road cars, because if you look at the trailing arm, and the R56 trailing arm is a common mod for the Mini community to change your R50 or R53 to an R56 trailing arm. The geometry, I think, is the same. Now, a lot of people do it just because it's cast aluminium and it's a lot lighter, which helps the track use, and it reduces unsprung mass, so it can make the suspension feel better, more reactive and more supple. But cleverly, I think this is what most people don't realize, is that they put this kind of tapered bushing, which fits into a tapered cone on the bottom of the trailing arm. And when that's all clamped up and locked nice and firm, just like a Morse paper in a lathe or a drill chuck, that taper then takes the bending load off the bolt. So all the bolt has to do is clamp it up, and then that tapered washer going into that taper on the bottom of the trailing arm, like we can see here, that takes the bending load off the bolt. So I think they knew these fatiguing or bending bolts was a problem, especially obviously if you've got a brand new Mini, 3 years old, and you take it in for your service, and the mechanic in the BMW garage goes, "Have you been jumping this or Angle C racetrack?" You're like, "No, honestly, it's just been picking up granny." So they obviously knew this was a design problem. But I've trawled the archives, and I've asked many of my friends who are automotive engineers, and I can't think of another car that comes factory with a coilover which is supported by a single bolt. It's very popular to do that for just the damper. Obviously, if you've ever fixed a cheap damper on like a Renault Clio or something, it's just a bolt at the top in the wheel arch and a bolt at the bottom, and it's a single bolt. But that will only ever see the maximum damping load, not the full force of the suspension load, which is basically the weight of the car plus any acceleration G factor. So let's say fully laden, these cars, like the 2 people in, is 1,200 kilos. So essentially, if it's equally balanced, just for ease of numbers, let's say that's divided by 4 wheels, that's 300 kilos static on each wheel. Let's say you go over a jump at angle C and you impact with 3G, that's suddenly 900 kilos of cantilever force on that bolt if that clamped friction interface breaks down. So although it's an M14 bolt, it's not really designed, bolts it shouldn't be designed to take bending load. And yeah, I just can't think of any other cars. I think there's some early Honda Civics which came with coilovers from factory, but they have like a clever, well, not clever, it's just like a fork design at the back. Even motorbikes with single-sided swinging arms, which is basically what a trailing arm is, where the shock goes onto that, they'll have a kind of fork or some sort of clevis arrangement to take the bending load off the bolt. So I'm thinking, can I kind of retrofit this kind of tapered collet kind of washer assembly that goes on the R56? And some people say, why don't you just fit after R56 trailing arms and then you would fix this? They're kind of credibility on gravel is unknown. I did propose this to the Mini Rally Challenge, and the technical review was that they might be a bit brittle for gravel use. It's better to have a steel arm that can bend rather than break. And if it's cast, I agree, it is quite brittle. You don't really get any bending, it just breaks. However, I think they would be strong enough. And if you think about what the training arm does, although it's a huge chunk of metal, it doesn't actually take a lot of load. So the trailing arm is basically a drag link. It takes the braking forces and the thrust forces forward and back. The side load is dealt with the two control arms, the track control arms, which are the kind of spindly little arms. Now, some of the guys, the motorsport guys, they reinforce these. It's a U section, a folded sheet steel with bushing at each end. They close that section to make it solid with a plate, and they seam weld it down the thing to make it stronger. Now, yes, it will make it stronger, but if you make that so strong that if you take a side load, for let's say you drift wide in the corner and you hit a bank or you hit a curb on tarmac, if that doesn't bend, something else is going to take the load. That could be your subframe, that could be the rear boot floor, that could even just put too much bending onto one of the bolts that attaches that to the chassis. And then if the bolt's bent, you can't get out and service. It's going to be more difficult to fix that or fix any other hard point or mounting point than actually just replace them links, because then links are on auto dock for 20 quid, brand new. And then, you get SKF ones for 30 quid. Or a cheaper one like a Ridex for 18 quid. So I'd rather just replace that. There's a bolt at each end. I'm going to keep that as the weak link on my car. I'm not going to reinforce them because I don't want to damage any other parts which are more difficult and more expensive to replace. Anyway, so they take the lateral forces. The trailing arm just takes the forward and back forces, and most of the time it's only doing braking forces. Obviously, it keeps the geometry of the car, and it takes the wheel load. So you've got your hub bolted to that with 4 M10 bolts. And that takes the whole weight of the hub trying to bend off. So it has to be quite strong in that direction. But in terms of suspension, it's just just a drag link. And it pulls on the bushing at the front, which is attached to the floor, the trailing arm bushing. And I can't ever think it's going to take a thrust, i.e. a force in the forward direction. The only time I can think of that was if you slam the car in reverse, you're going full speed in reverse and you slam the brakes on, then it's going to be pushing that link forward. But most of the time it's a drag link for wheel drag or braking. So although it's a very, very chunky part, I think the aluminium or cast aluminium R56 one would be more suitable. We're on 17 minutes. This is a really deep dive into suspension. So yeah, let's just have a look. So in this picture here, you can see the steel one above where the shock mounts on, which is basically just a through hole with a nut on the other side. And then down below is this cast one with this tapered section, and the corresponding part of the bush on the R56 damper locks into that taper, and that's how they've alleviated the bending load on the bolt. And I actually think it's a really clever design. Now, could I kind of weld on a matching pair of tapered washers or like a bush to the steel R53 arm or R50 arm? Yes, but if it slips and it doesn't mate perfectly, then what we've done is just elongate the lever arm and the bending load on the bolt. So I'm a bit worried about doing that. Obviously, the easiest way to do it is do the cup reinforcement, but like I said, it needs to be very, very tightly controlled, the width of that cup, the internal width. And then if you've got one damper that's, say, 30 mil wide on the bushing and another one that's 30.5 and you've made it 30, it won't go into the cup. It'll just be a pain in the arse. So unless you've got a batch of BC coilovers that you can measure the bush width on every one and say, right, I'm going to make all these parts to the exact width of this, it's a bit risky. The other thing you can do is obviously just upgrade your bolts that go into, I think factory they're 10.9. Those are the ones that broke on my car. They were the original BMW ones. I've since bought more BMW ones at like 15 quid a bolt. And I've also bought a set of 12.9 high tensiles. Now, the problem with the high tensiles at 12.9 is you don't get the corrosion resistance. So if you get crevice corrosion, or any time that to have a rust on the bolt or surface corrosion, that can start a crack propagating, even though it's of a higher tensile than you can with a zinc-coated factory bolt at the lower tensile. So I don't think that's a permanent fix. And I think at the moment, the only thing I'm going to do is replace these bolts every 2 rallies. And I think the main damage I think happens is actually on the tarmac rallies where they put jumps in, because there aren't so many jumps on gravel. And I don't think anything on Greystoke broke it. I think it was just an accumulation of fatigue. This happened to, I think, a couple of other Mini crews. Now, obviously, the more popular way to do this on a hatchback or shopping car is have your sprint. And this is even on luxury cars with independent rear suspensions, BMWs and stuff. most big BMWs, the spring sits in its own cup on its own suspension arm. So all the loads go through a much stronger arm. They don't go through any bolts. But when you push that inboard, you make a shorter, stiffer spring, a heavier spring, because you've got the leverage ratio between that and pivot. And the sub height, the subframe height increases, which for a small hatchback is not ideal because you're losing seat height in the rear. So yeah, that's a bit of a compromised design. It does seem to be the weak point. Obviously on the front, we've got McPherson strut. There's nothing wrong with that. It's absolutely bomb-proof, really, because you're clamping on that huge tube. And I think we're more worried on the front about the strut tops in the engine bay mushrooming or even ripping through. But mine have been welded and reinforced with plates, so that's not so much of an issue. Anyway, thanks to all the marshals of Greystoke. Thanks to all the Mini Rally Challenge competitors, seeing their bodges and hacks and ingenuity to finish the rally. Some of them, well, most of them finished the rally, is just a really good showing, and like credit to those guys. Like, that was the highlight of my day, seeing the fixes and bodges. Like a competitor, Andy, gearbox mount broke, basically hung the gearbox and engine off a breaker bar that was ratchet strapped across the engine bay between the strut tops. I mean, and finished the rally. Amazing work. So yeah, on to the next one. The next one's a tarmac rally. I won't be jumping the car. It's just not worth it, because I've just spent, God, don't remind me, a lot of money on a full set of rear dampers, because I was sold a full set. It was cheaper to buy a full set in the long run. And there's no redundancy in this design. If these lower shock bolts break again, the shock's on the floor and it's game over. So I'm not having to go at BC Racing. The shock didn't break. The lower bolt broke because of the suspension architecture of the car. So it's not, it doesn't matter if you fit Riger, Proflex, Öhlins, or Erlins. It's not the suspension's fault. It's just that's how the road car is designed, and like it's not designed to be a rally car. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that suspension deep dive, and I'll see you in the next one.